everyone. Welcome. It's the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, Week 5 XFL DFS edition. We're here to recap Week 4's usage and player notes from an XFL DFS standpoint, and then take a first look at Week 5 and some injury situations, top plays, and lineups advice and strategies for both FanDuel and DraftKings. Really excited about this episode. We're going to dig a little deeper, put some more opinion into this episode. If you listen to our first 4 weeks, you know that it's jam-packed with information, but we have to be honest about some things here. But before we get too deep into that, let me introduce ourselves. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined as always by our XFL DFS writer, Chris Rooney. What's up, Chris?
Brian, happy to be here, bringing you the big boy takes and analysis on the XFL. Definitely excited to talk about really not just Week 4, the first month of XFL action. I think we've seen enough games now where we're comfortable being a little more critical of this product. I think we all knew going into this that it was not going to be as polished as we are used to seeing with things like the NFL, which is obviously just at a much higher level as both as a business and as a football product because they have better players. But some of these games here in the XFL, Brian, have been pretty tough.
Yeah, and it makes it even worse when the tough games are the second part of the doubleheader for the day, especially on the 2-game slates, because you get excited, right? Naturally, no matter what sport it is, when you have an all-day slate and the last game is coming up, and you take a look at your lineups and you see, oh shit, I'm in pretty good shape. I just need this guy to do this game to go this way. And if you make multiple lineups, you're like, okay, I just need the game to do anything really. And then we've had a lot of letdown spots where one team just doesn't show up, and it's been pretty disappointing. And really, I think people are trying to fool themselves if they think the product is really that great. Like we are all yearning for football after the NFL season,
right? No
doubt about it, for sure. Like I totally understand that. However, we said it's actually in our MLB strategy guide where we say we understand that a lot of people don't like baseball. It's boring, it's slow for whatever reason. I don't feel that way, but I know a lot of people do feel that way. And that's not a bad thing. You can still make tons of money off baseball and not watch a single game. And so the XFL product can still be bad, and you can still make money from it. Both those things aren't mutually exclusive. So, but it is getting frustrating seeing, if you want a league to take off, Chris, if you see some of these coaches that just aren't making optimal decisions, some of these quarterbacks not showing up, it gets really frustrating.
Yeah, and I mean, I know the television numbers have remained very strong. I mean, by all the measurable data points that are out there, this league actually is performing much better than last spring's experiment the Alliance of American Football did before they pulled the rug out from under their teams and canceled the season early. I don't think that's going to happen with the XFL here. They're going to get through this season. They're even talking about year 2, so that's good. That means they have time to try to iron some of these things out. But I know, just you speaking of those 2-game slates, I think you were tilting pretty hard last Saturday. Led you to send a pretty epic tweet out about 6:30 p.m. last Saturday. I'm looking at it right now, Brian. It is as you dubbed it, the official XFL loser list. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that before we move on?
I think, pointing out the timestamp there is pretty important, because I think we can get the tone and the mindset behind tweets when you take a look at the time, right? And it was about the middle of that second game, and it was god awful. And it was immediately after Jim Zorn's explanation. Which was just legendary. If you haven't seen it, you can go to my Twitter feed. I retweeted it. But long story short, they score a touchdown, they being Seattle, in the fourth quarter against St. Louis. Score a touchdown in the fourth quarter to go down 20-16. Now, granted, not all of the analysis can and has been done on the point after touchdown rules, just because it's so new, we don't have large sample sizes. But there are some pretty basic situations. To go down 20-16, the conservative method would be to go for 1, to be down a field goal. However, I think the analytical approach would say go for 2. That way, if you make it, you're down. If you make a field goal, you take the lead. And if you don't, you still need a touchdown to win, right? Having that in the back of your mind is a good thing. Going for 3 is out of the question. There's no reason to go for 3 there. Jim Zorn immediately decides to go for 3, and then is interviewed, which is the best part about the XFL, I will say, immediately interviewed about it afterwards, and just had zero answer and had no clue when the reporter pressed him on saying, well, if you go for one, you'd be down three, and just looked lost as if that had never occurred to him. And that led me to tweet out the official loser list of the XFL, and I think as the games go on, this list will only grow, Chris.
It seems very possible, based off your list here, Brian. You've pretty much canceled every single coach of an under 500 team here in the XFL, and Matt McGloin catching some stray bullets with the New York Guardians as well. Especially, last but not least, on your original list here were some of these credentialed reporters, and there are people out there. I want to be careful here and say that they're doing great work. They're interfacing with people that are connected with these teams and trying to find out what they can. So this is not reserved for them, but we cannot have people out there that are trying to be good reporters putting out bad information. I know we had at least one situation last weekend where that did happen. It was with the Los Angeles running back situation. It was the first game of the weekend. We had a report that, a certain running back was going to be out, and then they weren't out. And it was just a disaster to try and navigate and make swaps because of this. And I know few people were, plugged into that, paying attention. I know a lot of our members were in the Discord just having a total conniption over it, like not sure what to do. These are the challenges that are going to be here as we get used to there being a new football league on our calendar, which obviously is something the XFL wants to establish as a regular occurrence. And so I think that the sports media is going to have to catch up to this, and I think we're just going to have to deal with those growing pains like we experienced this past weekend, Brian.
No, you're 100% right. And if the league is going to focus on gambling, if it's going to focus on DFS, then it needs to have better infrastructure in place as far as reporting goes, because at least on Twitter, and again, maybe outside of Twitter it's different, but that's all we know for now. You have these like people who actually have credentials to be at the game, most of the times aren't at the game, and are just retweeting what they see. They're copy and pasting from XFL.com, which again is fine. Like that's okay to have a Twitter account be like that, but to quote yourself as an insider and putting out information that's wrong is another thing completely, and it just frustrates DFS and sports bettors. And the thing is, you'll have someone who's like actually a journalist and works for a newspaper or a journalistic website, and they can just go to the game or talk to one coach and get 10 times the information immediately than some of these Twitter reporters. And if the league puts more effort into getting those people on board, because that's not their full-time effort. Most of these people who actually make breaking news are doing XFL on the side, or is a side part of their job. And we'll see like Diana Rossini just come and say, oh, this is something we never knew all week, and she found out in like 5 seconds because she's an actual credentialed reporter. Same thing with like the LA Wildcat situation. Some guy would be on the field and be like, oh, that's not true. This is what I see because I'm here at the game. So spotting the difference between those two types of reporters is huge for XFL DFS at this point, and we're still in the Wild West stage. But Chris, I think the XFL would benefit tremendously from getting actual reporters full-time involvement in the XFL.
Right. I think we've commiserated enough on what we've dealt with through the first few weeks of trying to scour for XFL news. I'm sure the people are here to listen about week 5, what we've learned from actual playing time. So let's get into some of these usage notes. See, I practiced that since the last week, and I got the word out good there. So first things first here, I want to go in the order of the teams as we're going to see them this weekend. The first game that we're going to have on Saturday is the Seattle Dragons versus the Houston Roughnecks. Obviously, everybody knows the Roughnecks have been the class of the league so far. The road team here is this Jim Zorn coached Dragons squad, which I know that you are just so excited to talk about right now.
Thrilled.
And the first thing that we need to address and really try to find out before Saturday is who's going to be starting at quarterback. They obviously pulled the original quarterback, Brandon Silvers, at halftime of that game against the Battlehawks in week 4 and opted to go with mobile, really kind of tuck and run specialist BJ Daniels at quarterback. Brian, I know at least for me, I think if BJ Daniels draws the start, he's interesting in a pace up spot here potentially against the Roughnecks with the potential rushing production that is there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. The fact that Zorn hasn't named a starter yet is pretty surprising. I personally don't think Silvers was playing that poorly. I mean, he's a product of the play calling. It was run, run,
Right.
pass like every single time. So can't really blame him for failing that spot in a tough spot on the road. But if Zorn is results oriented like I imagine he is, Daniels should get this start. And like you said, against Houston, Daniels was tucking and running, and there wasn't even a ton of pressure against St. Louis. He was just tucking and running as his first option. He could legit rush for 100 yards in this game, and I saw you put out your early Twitter rankings, and he was number 2 for you. That makes a ton of sense for me, but what does concern me if he does start is your guy Keenan Reynolds, who has an every down role. I'm not sure how he can increase his production, although I guess because it is a pace-up game, there should theoretically be more attempts coming his direction.
Yeah, so leading into my next point here, I wanted to talk about, I appreciate that you pointed this out. Keenan Reynolds has been on the field basically every snap of all 4 games the Dragons have played, has not really had much production outside of, I think it was week 2, he played very well for them. So, he's leading this Dragons team in air yards. And if Daniels is the quarterback, I think obviously we have to anticipate a lot less throwing going on. But if this is going to be a competitive game, a close game, I still think Reynolds is our best bet to have a chance to reach a real ceiling at wide receiver. So I still like him a lot this week, and now his price has come down a lot compared to what it was a couple weeks ago. He's just 6,500 on DraftKings, only $15 over on FanDuel for the 2-game slate. So I think I'll still be rostering a healthy percentage of Keenan Reynolds myself this week, just for those reasons alone. Obviously, would be interested in hearing what you have to say on that. And while you're thinking about that, let me know what you think about these Seattle running backs. What I'm seeing, Brian, is that Kenneth Farrow has sort of morphed into the actual lead back for the Dragons. I think through the first couple of weeks of the season, they were using all 3 of Farrow, Jaquan Gardner, and Trey Williams in more of a 3-way timeshare. But it's now 2 weeks in a row where Farrow has played the majority of the snaps in this backfield. So he seems to be the guy that they trust here more than any of the other running backs.
Yeah, I mean, just this past week alone, he played more snaps combined than both Gardner and Williams. At least Williams has some pass catching upside. Gardner hasn't really been used in the pass game whatsoever. So I do like, if Farrell can continue that 50-60% role, I think he's certainly underpriced. The fact that he's gotten into the end zone 2 weeks in a row won't likely keep him at lower ownership, but I do like where your head is there. And the issue we've seen time and time again is because the quarterback play is so poor in the XFL, in most spots, air yards doesn't translate as easily as it does in the NFL. Literally every player is Curtis Samuel because they're getting air yards and the deep accuracy just isn't there. We saw early in the season some analytics point that deep ball accuracy trailed pretty significantly by NFL standards. There weren't too many differences between 0 to 10 yards, but 15 yards and beyond we see a big difference, and that's probably a big reason. Do you think that changes our approach to these underperforming receivers as far as guys who are getting a ton of air yards? I know we'll talk about Rashad Ross, but similar type guys where I don't know. I mean, you got to keep playing those guys because eventually they're going to hit on these downfield targets.
Yeah, I mean, we only really have the usage data to go off of, right? And so we know that these are some of the players that should be putting up bigger numbers than they have thus far. The real unknown variable here, as you point out, is how long is it going to take for them to regress back to whatever level of production they're supposed to have. We know how it sort of functions in the NFL because we have just a rich, complete data set. There's more games, there's more talent on the field. So we know that those things happen far more frequently. It may actually take a lot longer for some of these guys to realize their true quote unquote expected outcome in this XFL environment, which is probably scary for us, frankly, as tournament players. Thinking about guys like Keenan Reynolds, especially, and Rashad Ross, as you brought up, who we'll talk about in a moment. I'm not sure what the answer is there. It's good food for thought. It's good for everybody to sort of wrestle with that, and maybe actually leads us to lean a little more towards these safer tight end and slot wide receiver plays in DFS if we want high floor for cash games and stuff like that. So I guess that's where my head is on your question. On the Roughnecks side of things here, Brian, it's pretty clear now through 4 weeks that, now I know that one player here had a pretty invisible performance in week 4, which of course, now that we used him, that's why it happened. But both Cam Phillips and Nick Hawley are playing basically all of the snaps and running a ton of the routes for the Houston Roughnecks, far more than anybody else. Even Khalil Lewis is playing a smaller role than those two. So those are the main three, really. Sammy Coates has fallen behind all three of them. What is your read here with these Roughnecks receivers? Obviously everybody about Cam Phillips. Obviously everybody knows about Nick Hawley after his performance last week, but I don't think we can get away from playing any of these guys with the fact that Houston is just the best team in the league right now.
Yeah, the fact that Phillips and Hawley are playing nearly every down. I'm hoping Phillips goes under owned this week after his performance. He was. I read a stat. I think it was. I think XFL.com actually posted it. Was some advanced stats from week 4, and he had press coverage on all but one of his routes in week 4, and obviously beating press coverage can be a big hurdle to playing in the National Football League, and a lot of players coming from college are running wide open routes, not seeing press coverage a ton, and maybe, just maybe, that's the reason. I'm not gonna. I didn't hashtag watch the film, but I assume that could be part of the reason why he didn't get a ton of targets in week 4. So I think he bounces back in a big time because his role is so strong. The Sammy Coates issue is still, he didn't get the air yards this week, so we're less inclined to play him. But still, 2-game slate. On a pass-heavy team, 80% of the time passing in neutral situations, you have to consider him. 4-game, I understand it. What's his price down to now? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, so he's, you want to talk 2-game slate. He's just $11 now on that FanDuel slate. So, he's certainly a pretty, we can't say that he's more than a dart throw really at this point, but to your point, this is an offense that is looking to throw the ball downfield, and we know what he is capable of if he actually learns to catch. So, I think Coates makes for a nice tournament play there, but I wouldn't do more than maybe sprinkling him into like 1 or 2 lineups at this point, because he's just not getting the attention that some of these other guys are in this offense. I personally think Nick Hawley is probably the best opportunity here on both sites, and that's just because I know he's coming off the big game, but his price is still lower than Phillips by a wide margin, even though the usage is pretty similar. And to your point with Phillips, I think he bounces back. I don't think he's going to get 1 reception for 9 yards again. That was just an outlier result in a bad way after some big outlier results the previous 2 weeks that were good for us if you used them. So the thing with Phillips here is, I guess, what was I trying to say here? It's always good when you forget what you're in the middle of saying. During the broadcast, because I know you didn't really watch, quote unquote, the film here, they mentioned that there was a strong possibility that June Jones wanted to get other receivers involved, and probably sensitive to the fact that Phillips was doing all of the work. And so it probably made sense for Houston to focus on, I don't want to say that Phillips was a decoy. You're saying he was in press coverage. So it makes sense that they were kind of looking away from him on several of these targets. It just makes sense that they were trying to spread the ball around and get some of these other guys involved. Now that they've done that, I think they can go back to Phillips a little bit more here in week 5.
Yeah, 2 final points on this game. One, June Jones is dangerously close to being on the canceled list. He is the most conservative coach on 4th and short in the XFL. That's going to come back and bite him, and that's when we'll see his introduction to the list. 2, actually important. We've been compiling tons of data on ownership for XFL, and I think this Nick Hawley, Cam Phillips situation will bear some fruit in week 5, just because, Chris, we found an insane correlation between, even more so than you would normally think recency bias, insane correlation between previous week's fantasy performance and this week's ownership. And it gets us to the ability where we can pretty easily figure out who's going to be high owned.
Yeah, the correlations between who had the best games the week before and then their ownership on DraftKings and FanDuel in the next week is through the roof in this sport. So, even though I like Nick Hawley a lot here, I'm glad you brought this up. We can expect him to be extremely high owned this upcoming weekend for sure. So that's enough on this game. Why don't we move on to the New York Guardians and the Dallas Renegades, which is the night game for the Saturday slate, second game of the weekend. It'd be interesting to see what they do with their quarterbacks here, Brian. Matt McGloin is apparently a full participant in practice again for them. I would think that they would look to stick with Luis Perez. I think he played decent for them in this past game. Obviously got the wins. So, if that is what shakes out here, I think we do have one value opportunity on the slate to consider, and I think it's tight end Jake Powell, who saw a real change in usage. Played 96% of the snaps in that game and was out there for 100% of the routes run on passing plays. Only got 4 targets, but New York just didn't pass a lot because these bad teams don't pass a lot in the XFL. But Powell's cheap enough where I think he's on our radar here for tournaments for sure.
Yeah, definitely, especially on the 2-game slate. I would prefer if Luis Perez started, although I am glad to see Matt McGloin recovered nicely from his thorax injury. I think it's hard for them not to start Perez here. And that is an interesting note on Jake Powell. What about the running back situation? It looks like Darius Victor is still the guy, even though it's somewhat of a committee.
Yeah, so this is, to me, a little similar to what I think we've learned with the Seattle backfield that we talked about a few minutes ago. 2 weeks in a row now where it's pretty clear that when Victor is healthy and available to play, that he's the one that they want to use over Tim Cook, over Colburn, over Justin Stockton, who was just straight up inactive in week 4, despite seeing a lot of targets in week 3. Victor's game in week 2, he left early with, I forget what the injury was, quite frankly, but he was just unable to finish the game. So that's why we saw some of the usage shift around in this backfield. Particularly when they're leading, Victor gets a ton of touches as well. So it looks like Kevin Gilbride is going to be featuring Victor in some positive game script situations, which is something for us to be mindful of going into a game against a Renegades offense that has to play their second string quarterback.
Yeah, and I know this is a spot you immediately pointed out, at least to me early in the week, was you were surprised that Dallas was 8-point favorites here. I know New York's on the road, but they are starting Phillip Nelson. Landry Jones sprained MCL, out at least 2 weeks, likely a little bit longer, re-injured that knee ailment he had back in training camp. So Nelson will start, and this Dallas offense is interesting. And I don't even think actually interesting is definitely the wrong word because it's not even interesting. And if Hal Mummy wasn't an extremely tough man and played through a broken leg, he would be on the list as well for his horizontal raid and his new commitment to the run game. However, I digress. Parham and Nagel are still getting every down rolls. I think with Phillip Nelson's lower average depth of target we saw in week 1 on his passes probably favors Nagel more, whereas Parham has seen a pretty significant average depth of target drop with Nelson under center.
Yeah, and I think we got to turn to probably, not that for anyone who's been XFL DFS, probably going to turn to both Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar a lot at the running back spot in our lineups, just because the way that Mummy is calling plays is very favorable to both of them, particularly in the passing game. Obviously, with those short checkdowns behind the line of scrimmage, they're both seeing a healthy amount of those. So both are going to be in play in a spot where, they're favored, but as you pointed out, I really suspect that line in here. So we'll see how things shake out on Saturday. Probably can tell I'm not as excited about this game as we were the Roughnecks and the Dragons game, because I'm already ready to move on. If there's anything else you really want to point out here with New York and Dallas, Brian?
No, the only point here is that Cameron Artis-Payne, Lance Dunbar continue to be the leaders in XFL DFS opportunity, leaders in goal line and red zone opportunity, and they make a case for both of them to be in your lineup, and they should be the top running back options, period, regardless of which slate or contest type that you play. So, Chris, let's move on to Sunday's games. St. Louis and DC, looking at last week's usage and notes. St. Louis, we highlighted an interesting trend from week 3 to week 4 with DeMornay Pearson-L taking a back seat to Brandon Riley, right. And that continued here in week 4, despite, of course, Pearson-L being higher owned and outscoring him against Seattle. But it looks like LaDainian Washington is the only guy here really playing every snap.
Yeah, so LaDainian Washington has virtually a 100% snap share, a little less than that, but playing far more at wide receiver than any of these other guys on the Battlehawks. Alonzo Russell took a step back in week 4 compared to how much he was playing the previous 3 weeks, while Brandon Riley's snaps looked like they continued to eat into Pearson-L's. So I don't see how you can really roster anyone other than Washington and feel great about it in low risk. In fact, I don't even know if you can roster Washington and feel great about it in low risk, because this is like literally the run heaviest offense in the XFL. It's almost, I'm trying to be nice here, but to me, it's almost stupid how much they run the football. It's like 60% of the time they're running the football here. Which
is bad considering they may have the actually most talented quarterback in the league. So.
Right. They have clearly a passer who is in the conversation. Top two, top three here in the XFL and Tamu. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens if they are in a more competitive game here with the defenders who have looked pretty bad over the last couple of weeks. So I don't know, maybe that won't happen, but hard to get away from these St. Louis running backs. But, I was looking a little bit this morning before we planned to do this podcast this afternoon, and both Christine Michael and Matt Jones are on the injury report here on Thursday. And I think that does lead to an interesting situation. And now people are going to say Jones has been on the injury report like all friggin' season. Yep. He's played. So, we could probably expect him to be okay. He's still listed with a knee injury. Christine Michael's listed with an illness, whatever that means, whatever that is. And something to kind of read into that jumped out to me was they waived one of their lower depth chart running backs, Leonard Tillery, 2 days ago. And then yesterday they brought him back. So to me, that kind of suggests, Brian, that at least one of these guys might be down on Sunday.
We saw it. We see this in the NFL all the time, right? We look at midweek transactions at a particular position to try to gauge how availability might look on game day, and you're exactly right. They actually activated Sherman Beatty off injured reserve, so they waived Leonard Tillery, other running back, as a result. Then they brought him back, so now they have 5 running backs. Keith Ford's still on the roster too, so right. This is a really interesting spot overall. Watching the running back injuries, but then St. Louis winning 2 games at home pretty convincingly, going to DC, who just got blown out the last 2 games, and unsurprisingly, St. Louis is getting 70% of the bets here. They're 4.5-point road favorites. Screams like a letdown spot to me. I called it last week with New York. This isn't necessarily a West Coast to East Coast game, but it is a road game, and DC is getting back home. So I think a DC favorable game script, St. Louis pass heavy game script will look good in tournaments. But we can expand on that more in the daily plug. Anything else from this game before we move on to the final game?
Yeah, I would just say that with those running backs, even if we're dealing with some injuries there, Christine Michael did play more than Matt Jones last week, just in terms of snaps. So just something to monitor, maybe potentially a little bit of a shift there. I don't know, but just it did stick out to me. And just with DC, Rashad Ross, man. I mean, this guy, not seeing a huge volume of targets, but the targets that he is seeing are just like super deep down the field, super high value. Man. If he connects on a couple of these throws with Cardale, which I think has really been the problem. You tweeted out a nice video compilation of just all these terrible throws Cardale made last week, which, really resonated with me and showed why probably Ross hasn't been meeting his expectations here. But I think Ross is probably the best tournament play on the entire slate, just looking at his usage here.
Yeah. Weak, despite lack of production in the box score, he was number 2 in air yards in week 4 for the entire league, and he actually finished with 139 air yards on 7 targets, despite catching, I think, just 1 or 2 passes. So I really like that situation. Assume this week Cardale gets it anywhere near his radius on those deep passes. So, all right, last game of week number 5, Tampa Bay and LA. Tampa Bay actually, surprisingly, has allowed the least amount of yards in the league, has totaled the most amount of yards on offense. I think that's right. And are due for some positive regression. And we've seen it in the red zone the last couple of weeks. Didn't get the W against Houston, but they did pretty handily defeat DC in week 4. And as a result, we see guys like Jalen Tolliver and Dan Williams having tons of opportunity.
Yeah, and the pricing here is still not correct, I don't think. Dan Williams is being priced appropriately for his role, but 8,500 on DraftKings with Tolliver sitting at just 5,700. At least to me, Brian, that means Tolliver is the clear play, at least probably for low risk and stuff like that, because his role is just as strong as Dan Williams is as far as snaps played, routes run, targets, whatever you want to talk about. They're both right there neck and neck with each other. So I definitely am finding myself anyway playing a little more Tolliver than Williams for that reason. And then on the LA side, in week 3, I was willing to say it was a little fluky with Trey McBride, but in week 4, without Nelson Spruce available, Trey McBride played basically every snap for this Wildcats offense. If Spruce is going to miss again, which, he is listed as DMP in practice here on Thursday. Seems like there's a good chance he misses another game here. I think McBride's price is probably still a little too low as the number one receiving option here for LA, who has been pressing the ball downfield in the passing game more than any other team. Josh Johnson has the deepest average depth of target of any of these quarterbacks. And I think he's potentially the best passer of any of these quarterbacks. So I think this might be the duo that wins some tournaments on Sunday, both on that 2-game slate and on the 4-game slate as well.
Yeah, really, really good points there, Chris. And I'll bring up 2 items to note here. First, the Trey McBride situation. He was 75% owned on FanDuel in the 2-game slate last week. And yeah, it's actually insane. So we all expected that he would be the lead dog, right? I think we all, if we had to make a bet as the most probable situation, it would be he was the leader in routes and targets for LA. However, he'd only played 16 snaps the week before. He's been off and on the injury report all season. Left that game with a head-like injury, it looked like. Right. So there was certainly a chance that he wouldn't play a full complement of snaps. And seeing a guy who may not play a full complement of snaps at 75% ownership is exactly what you want. Now, of course, he was the highest scorer on the slate for both 2-game and 4-game because that's what the XFL does. But that's the type of situation you should be looking for every single week in the XFL. Second note is Jordan Smallwood and Adonis Jennings. Jennings was the guy we pointed out last week to have an increased role, and he was playing pretty heavily early in the game. And if you're like me and you watch every second of every game because you want to, Jennings was playing a ton, and then because everyone's mic'd up, he missed an assignment in the early third quarter. Yeah. Josh Johnson ripped into him, and his playing time plummeted from there on out. So that's something to monitor as we move forward here.
Yeah, so Jennings' price still attractive, but I definitely feel a little more skeptical about him after watching Josh Johnson kind of tear into him there. I saw that as well. It was definitely interesting. Last note here with this Wildcats offense, Brian. I don't know how to say that. Harris, sorry, buddy, if you're listening. I don't know how to say your first name there. But he played the most snaps in this backfield despite the fact that original starting running back Elijah Hood was active, was able to play. Looks like Martez Carter, who was the running back who had an awesome game for them in week 3, still on the injury report, still dealing with a hip injury, I think it is. So we might actually be going back to Harris here in week 4 if he's going to be the lead running back here for the Wildcats. Yeah,
I think it actually, because we have no idea. Reporting sketchy at best with this LA team. So even, on the 2-game slate, maybe you make a decision here, but I would just be more inclined to play the 2 Tampa Bay running backs and just ignore this situation completely in 2 games. So, all right, we've hit a lot of points here, so let's run through these final week 5 notes from a high-level perspective. Spreads and totals, we have 2 big favorites on Saturday, Houston and Dallas, and that's despite Dallas not having a quarterback. But the Seattle-Houston total, once again, is the highest total of the week. Any thoughts there, Chris, on the slate of games?
I think we're just going to see this week in and week out with the Houston Roughnecks, until they start playing poorly. If they ever play poorly, they're going to carry the highest total in betting markets probably every single week here for the rest of the season. And I don't really see any way that we can't. I guess let me put it this way. If you're the type of player that's only playing to 3 lineups in XFL DFS, playing this super casually, it's really tough to not build a core around, 2 or 3 players from whatever game Houston is involved in. And I would personally recommend just sticking with that. We'll put out our daily plug tomorrow, every Friday throughout the season, and we'll give you some tips and advice for how to build out the rest of your lineup around that. But at least the way this league has been playing out and the way things have been going, we're probably just going to have to eat the chalk here with Roughnecks games moving forward.
It's hard to argue with that. I really can't. So if you like any of these spreads or totals, for those of you listening, a quick hashtag ad for you. We've made some partnerships with sportsbooks in legal jurisdictions. So if you are living in, or you live near, or you're traveling to Indiana, Iowa, New Jersey, here this weekend or in the coming days, weeks, and months, hit us up. OccupyFantasy.com. You'll see our email address, or you can DM us on Twitter. We have deposit offers for new users in those states for a variety of sports books. And we talk about for DFS how deposit bonuses are crucial to to enlarging your bankroll. It's free money. And these sportsbooks are offering deposit bonuses to attract new users, right? And it doesn't make a ton of sense if you first look at it that why are they offering so much money for new users? Guys, they've done the studies. They know how much people will bet. They're giving this money away to attract new users. And fortunately, we've created these partnerships, and we can offer people who use our sign-up codes and our links these incredible deposit bonuses. And so if you'd like to bet on XFL and you're in these jurisdictions, certainly hit us up, and we'll get you hooked up with those deposit bonus codes. So, all right, hashtag ad over. Chris, 2 transactions this week. We talked about St. Louis's running back Leonard. We talked about their whole situation, but Kermit Whitfield for LA was released. He's played like a part-time slot role. Any idea what this could signify?
Yeah, this was interesting to me. He was mixing in on kick returns. Saw Mcbride doing that in week 3 anyway, before he got injured. So, maybe they're confident in going back to him here, and they just didn't see a need to go with Whitfield. Here's another tricky one for me. Maybe this does speak potentially to the health, or at least the trajectory of how Nelson Spruce is trending, if they think they're going to get both Spruce and McBride out there for a ton of snaps, maybe to let a guy like Whitfield go. But really the most honest take I have for you and for the people is that this was a surprising move to me. I thought he was a valuable kind of gadget weapon for them. They were using him on some jet sweeps and stuff like that in offense as well. So, I don't know what led to this, but definitely something to keep in mind when you are building line for Sunday's slate and for the 4-game slate. Kermit Whitfield will not be available to you.
Yeah, and perhaps this is due to the health of Saeed Blacknall too, who we've pinpointed a couple times, and he actually got this 3rd most air yards of the entire weekend on just 3 targets last week. 97 air yards on 3 targets. He looks to be poised for an every down role if Nelson Spruce does miss. So speaking of missing games, let's run through any injury report highlights. Again, it's only Thursday. We don't even have the official Thursday injury report in yet. But Chris, any guys we should be, or situations we should be monitoring heading into the weekend?
Yeah, Sammy Coates. So Sammy Coates obviously already seeing his role diminish. He's actually playing less than Sam Mobley, who would be a wide receiver 4 behind the other 3 in front of him, Phillips, Holly, and Lewis. He hasn't practiced. He didn't practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. He's got a hamstring issue apparently. So seems like it's pretty possible Coach just isn't even available for us to light our money on fire playing this weekend.
Please let that be a thing. Just please miss the game. Just please miss it.
So that's, I think, the only big one that I'm looking at here based off of our notes that we didn't cover. Oh, well, LA running backs as well, Brian. Martez Carter was limited with that hip. Already touched on that a little bit, but Larry Rose limited as well. So I know, you're probably right. The lean is probably just to avoid playing the running backs in this backfield. LA likes to pass the football a lot as it is anyway, but we may actually end up with a pretty small running back room to pick from here in LA, which is just something to keep in mind with late swaps and stuff like that on Sunday.
Good point. Final guy I do want to talk about, and again, it's early in the week, but De'Veon Smith, Tampa Bay running back. He did not practice on Wednesday with his foot issue. We don't know if this is severe at all, and he may practice today and be fine. But if he is out, that vaults Jacques Patrick into a massive role, and he already leads the league in goal line and red zone opportunities as it is as a part-time player. So if De'Veon Smith misses, that would mean huge things for Patrick in Week 5.
Yeah, and for some reason, Brian, this game has like a 9 p.m. kickoff time on Sunday. This Tampa Bay LA game. So, whatever. We're going to watch this afternoon game and then have to sit around for 3 hours waiting for more football. So that's what the XFL wants to do. You know what? They know that us degenerate football fans will stick around and probably watch it. So we'll see how that goes. Brian, honestly, that's everything I had specific to the Week 5 slate for you. I'm not going to let you or the people get out of here, though, without telling them a little bit more about, I guess, the number one thing that we like to talk about in DFS, and that is, of course, the satellite strategy. I was telling you a little bit last night that FanDuel posted some of these single-game satellites to get into some of these opening Major League Baseball, MLB, DFS contests at the end of the month here. I think I might still be the only person who's entered a lineup in some contest. These slates are very soft. Hopefully we can make them a little more difficult for people out there by some of the Occupy members and subscribers getting into FanDuel single game XFL satellite contests to win some tickets into these upcoming MLB tournaments that will be happening here in late March, early April. I believe there are satellites as well for some big golf tournaments coming up, and I know that there's some golf news that I think you might want to talk about as well for next week.
Yeah, so satellites for MLB. Of course, our MLB model will be up and running. Our MLB Daily Plug will be up and running opening day for Occupy Fantasy members. Remember, memberships get you access not just to XFL, like you're listening to here, but literally every sport that we offer. And that now includes a seventh sport, PGA. Our Occupy model will be up and running weekly from the PGA Championship through the final major of the season. Really excited about that. And again, no increase in membership costs. It'll just be included free of charge. So so if you're looking to satellite hunt, ticket hunt, PGA and MLB added to your list.
Yeah, that's fantastic news. I'm excited about it. I hope the members are excited about it. There are, I think it's going to be 5 Millionaire Maker tournaments this year in golf, starting with one next week. So hopefully you can win some satellite tickets to those contests on DraftKings I'm talking about. And maybe, just maybe one of our Occupy members will join you, Brian, in that Millionaires Winners Circle.
I will welcome them with open arms. I hope they join. So, all right, for Chris, I'm Brian. That'll do it. If you like what we've done here, if you want more just misery in talking about the XFL, go ahead and click that follow button, whether it's here on YouTube or in your podcast apps, or subscribe. Whatever the button says, click it so you know when our videos and our podcasts are released. Give us a thumbs up, leave us a review, a comment. We'd certainly appreciate it. We love talking to our members and our listeners, so be sure to engage. And again, we are recording this live on Twitch too if you're listening to this after the fact. So twitch.tv/OccupyFantasy is where you can follow us for any live content that we do. So again, thanks for listening. Good luck to everyone this week, and we will talk to you soon.